So if I've been using C++ since before Microsoft had a C++ compiler, and that's over 21 years, then how long has C++ been a thing? So 1979 is apparently when Bjarne started to work on it and to tell people about it. And it got the name in 1983, which is 30 years now.
It's Bjarne Stroustrup, who is the creator of the language.
One person who said, this would be a good idea, and set out to make it happen, and is still very active in C++ and its future and its growth as the time goes by. So it's been around as C++ for 30 years, and it's an ISO standard. And this is kind of a weird thing for some people. It doesn't belong to any company or person or organization other than the organization that is standard C++. And this ISO standard has a committee that meets, hundreds now of people.
Yeah,
yes?
they've had about 100 people at the last few meetings. So it's a big group from dozens of companies and organizations. So it's not all commercial. Some of the there's people from the open source community, people from universities. Lots of research has been going into new language features for C++.
Yeah, and they are working on the language, and there's also a library that comes with the language that the capabilities of the library are set by the standards committee. And you have to go through the standards process to get something changed in the library, but then each individual vendor is responsible for shipping and implementation of the library with their tools. I think you can't really mix and match, yeah?
No, generally you have to use a particular library with tools. So for example, our standard library only works on Windows with our compiler, and it's largely, I mean, we use, it's tightly coupled to the compiler. Like there's certain things in the standard library that can only be implemented with help from the compiler.
You have to know something about what's happening under the covers in order to write that library.
Exactly, yes. So there is some tight coupling there, but you generally don't need to worry about it. When you get a compiler package for Windows, you may be using ours, you may be using another one. It'll have everything you need, or it should have everything you need.
That's the whole point of a standard.
Exactly. The one other thing to mention about the history is because C++ is so old, and because it didn't really start in 1979, it started much earlier when C was invented, since it has mostly retained backward compatibility with C. The important thing is that it's really old, and over the last 40 years we've learned a lot about software development. So the way that we write clean code today, and how we know how to write the best code using the best practices, is very different from what we did 40 years ago. And so a lot of code that you see out there in the wild is going to be rather ugly, or it may use a lot of non-modern things. It's really only been the last 15 years or so that we've really started to understand how best to use the facilities that C++ has to write really great code. Maybe a bit earlier in the 90s, but generally about 15 years has been how long this modern C++ that we're going to be showing you has developed.
Yeah, so if you have a book that, I don't know, one of your parents used in college to learn C++ from, please do not look at that book. Like, don't even open it, because it's going to be full of old school, we don't do it like that anymore, that's harder than it needs to be ways of coming at C++. And what James and I want to show you today is that C++ is not a scary language. It's a very powerful and expressive language with elegance and expressivity. That's a word that I find myself using a lot lately, about choosing a way to write your code that makes it obvious to whoever reads it what it does.
Yep.
And those scary tricks that people used to pull off with no more.
Absolutely. And because of its age, there's often multiple ways to do things. So for example, we may see later today, there's many ways to initialize variables, at least 3 or 4. And this is largely because of age. Like, there was one way to do it in C, and then we learned, oh, hey, that doesn't work for everything, so let's introduce a new way. So then we had 2 ways, and they didn't really work very well. There were 2 of them, so we came up with a 3rd way, and it mostly works. And so it's the 3rd way that we'll be showing you, because you should be using it pretty much everywhere in your code.
Right. So you may find C++ code elsewhere that doesn't look exactly like what we're showing you. That doesn't make that code wrong or our code wrong. It just makes them different, because we have a lot of different ways to do the same thing. But we do kind of feel pretty strongly that our way is right for that readability and expressivity.
Yep.